You're all a little too far away from me, so I'm going to ask you to take my word for it. Right here, the thing that I'm touching is a remote control. The remote control has got 4 buttons, but I only use 3 of them. The first button, when I press it, it lets me into the building where my home apartment is. The second button, when I press that, that calls the lift for me. And the third button, when I press that, it alights the button for the floor that I live on, which is way too high for me to reach. So what you say? These days, technology should be able to do that with no fuss whatsoever. But this remote control is special. The reason why it's special is because of my building's building manager. One day when we moved in, he saw me waiting at the front door to be able to get in, and he saw people having to help to open the door and let me in and then press the button. And he noticed that concierge in the building always had to press the button for me to get up to my floor. And so he decided on his own, without any fuss at all and without much ado, to organise this remote control. And so now I can get in and out of my home apartment independently. That's the first time I've ever been able to get in and out of my home independently. And I'm going to put a timestamp on that because time's an important part of this discussion. That occurred in late 2019, so just last year. Last year was the first time I've ever been able to independently move in and out of my own home. And it's all because of that man. And he made no fuss. There was no issue. He just made it happen. So I'm going to ask you to park that story now, and I'm going to tell you another story. This story is from 1990, long, long time ago. In 1990, I finished my medical degree, and I didn't finish my medical degree, I finished my school. I'm getting ahead of myself. I finished my school, I got to the HSC, and back then what we were required to do, what students were required to do was to fill out a form in which you'd put your preferences down for the course that you wanted to do in order of priority, the course you wanted to do and the university at which you wanted to do it. And depending on the results you got, you'd be given your order of priority. So it was about 4 days after the HSC results came out that I received an unusual phone call, or one that I thought was unusual anyway. It was the sub-dean of the Faculty of Medicine at the university where I had selected to be my first preference, where I wanted to study medicine, calling me and asking me to come in for a meeting. I thought that was a bit unusual, but I guess I thought, well, he wants to maybe chat with me about how this is all going to work and what my expectations were. So I accepted the invitation. I went to his office, and he spent around about 2 hours trying to persuade me that medicine wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. And I think it was around about just after the clock struck past 2 hours that he'd realised that he wasn't going to persuade me of that I was clearly excited and engaged in the process and the notion of studying medicine. So he quickly changed his tune, very quickly. 2 hours of telling me that medicine wasn't what I wanted to do with my life, and then about the next 30 seconds, he said to me, well, this university won't accept you. We won't accept you into medical school here, so you'll have to go elsewhere. And that happened about as quickly as I just said it. So from 2 hours to 30 seconds to out the door. Thanks very much. So there you have it, folks. 2 vastly different approaches to, well, actually, one might say, at opposing ends of the spectrum to the same issue, a physical disability. Those interactions occurred at distinct points in time, albeit, granted, 30 years apart, so one might like to be tempted to think that the passage of time has something to do with the change in attitude. But there was one constant for both of them. That constant was this: neither of those men were concerned with who I was as a person. They only had one sole focus, and that was a physical disability. That was the sole focus of both of those interactions. They were concerned, the thing that went through their mind must have been something like, how can I work out whether a physical disability can fit within the circumstances or can be accommodated by the circumstances giving rise to this interaction? As to the 30 years between the two events, I do accept that societal beliefs change over time. It's not particularly appealing to me, though, to explain away the prejudicial behaviour that the sub-dean showed to me by suggesting that, well, that was how it was then. That's what people's attitudes were. That's what the belief was. Because I think that's adopting that approach is a little bit like a slippery slope, because if you adopt that approach, now becomes then 30 years from now. And so it leads to the unavoidable conclusion that intolerance, discrimination, and prejudice will be explained away for time in memoriam. So that's why I don't really like it much. And besides, although my children are very quick to remind me that I'm getting old, 30 years is really not such a long time. And in my book, 30 years is definitely not long enough to justify an intolerant attitude or behaviour. Now, when I say that we ought not be quick to explain away prejudicial behaviours, focusing on the fact that beliefs change over time, I think it's important to recognise that the beliefs that I'm talking about are the collective beliefs of many. I'm not at all talking about our own individual beliefs. And that's important because it highlights what I think is a very interesting paradox that goes with the phrase, beliefs change over time. The paradox arises because when we apply the collective beliefs of many approach to beliefs change over time, we need to reject the idea that we should be allowing and making it possible for prejudicial attitudes to be swept under the carpet, those ones from a long time ago. But at the same time, when we apply the own individual beliefs approach to beliefs change over time, that's a whole different equation. It's something I think that we need to embrace because it encourages us to be inquisitive and open-minded. It gives meaning to the decisions that we make in life and to the way we run our lives. I'm going to call that paradox the collective versus own paradox. That's what I'm going to refer to it as later on. As we live, we grow is a phrase that is actually the linchpin of the meaning of an often cited passage from an Austrian-Israeli philosopher, a Jewish man by the name of Martin Buber. Buber was arguably the most influential philosophers of his time. And he was very well known in particular for his philosophy on dialogue. I'm afraid that's not something we're going to be able to tackle tonight. However, a real impression is left when reading about Buber and his philosophical theories. His students, and often students of his students, will repeatedly reflect on the fact that Buber had a very interesting approach to his philosophies. Not only did he teach them, but he lived them. One story repeatedly told by Buber's students is that whenever Buber met someone for the first time, or was otherwise about to sit down and have a dialogue with someone, he would first, before talking, gaze into their eyes, and his gaze would invite them to look back into his. And at that moment, when their gazes were exchanged, the students write and report that Buber would be able to instill in the person that he was about to speak to a profoundly interested view as to what the dialogue was about to be. And he even reflected that the dialogue was something that he was going to be open to and listen to and absorb without judging the person. And he was going to be open to that person, irrespective of the things that he learns from what they say. That's some pretty powerful stuff, especially when you think that Buber's been gone for a long time. He died in 1965. In Israel, I might add. I wonder what my life, or what would have happened for me, if that sub-dean had approached that first interaction that he had with me in a more Buberesque manner. But there must be more to it than that. There must be. Because, as you've heard, I did end up getting a Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery from the University of Sydney. That was my second choice, by the way, on my preferences. And yet, as I stand here before you tonight and give this presentation, my practice profession is law. Now, part of the reason for the change in profession stems from institutional discrimination, but that's really another story for another day. And then, of course, there's my building manager. Buber or no Buber, I've got my remote control and I'm independently getting in and out of my home. I would say, though, that independently getting in and out of my home happened for the first time when I was 47 years old. So you can imagine that before then, it didn't happen. So when I reflect on it, perhaps the more to it lies near the point at which we choose. We choose to take on the responsibility, recognising that our own individual beliefs must necessarily contribute to the collective beliefs of many. It seems to me that when we take on that responsibility, we manage as a united people to reconcile that collective versus own paradox, so that the phrase beliefs change over time it just can't mean permitting the explaining away of prejudicial behaviours from time gone past. Its meaning can only permit an open-minded an inclusive version of the world, a version of the world in which collective beliefs can't even recognise that intolerance or discrimination are permissible frameworks for interaction between people. The world is screaming out for that now. We are now at a moment in history where movements, ideologies are coming out and people are saying, we won't have this. The Black Lives Matter movement is one example of a movement which spread through the globe at great knots, only powered by its own momentum. And you see people all over the world saying, we won't have this anymore. We're not interested. We need to make change. And then another example, very topical at the moment in the papers, is the institutional discrimination against women in the legal profession, something that has gone on for a long time now and is finally being opened up and examined and scrutinised. So with this prompt, I'm going to ask for a slide to be popped up. This is my only slide. And I wanted to put it up because, well, my reasons for putting it up are twofold. First of all, for me personally, it's a very powerful message. It's something that speaks to the decisions I make and the way I approach my life. And so I wanted to share it with you all. And the second reason for me wanting to show you and share this with you is because it invites all of us to acknowledge that beliefs change over time, making way for constant discovery, which Buber suggests we should live, being open to adventure, and also being open to adventure in a heightened awareness of living. Unsurprisingly then, or perhaps put another way, it shouldn't surprise you that Buber's students would say that not only did he teach his philosophies, but he lived them. And I think this is a very good example of him expressing how he lives his own philosophies. So I'd like to conclude by inviting each of you, everyone in this room, to choose to take responsibility and to recognise the immense importance that of the contributions that our own individual beliefs can make to the collective beliefs of many. I think the more people who do that, the more quickly we can stop even considering that it's acceptable or appropriate to explain away prejudicial behaviours from the past. And most importantly, doing so will make room for people willing to live, as Buber suggests, in constant discovery. Very open-minded and very insightful. Thank you.